Today, we're diving into the blueprint for inner healing found in Rob Reimer's amazing book, Soul Care. We're going to unpack why so many of us feel stuck, running in circles we just can't seem to break, and maybe, just maybe, map out a path to some real, lasting freedom. Let's get into it. The book starts by hitting us with a really tough, but really powerful question. What if all the recurring problems, the conflicts, the frustrations in your life, what if they all have one thing in common? You. I know, it's a jarring thought, but it's the absolute starting point for this whole journey of soul care. The author makes it super clear this isn't just your problem. He shares stories about seeing this kind of pain absolutely everywhere, from the streets of Italy to his own living room. He argues that it's just part of the human condition. Nobody gets a pass. Now, this idea became deeply personal for the author. He'd heard this quote years before, and, he thought it was a clever little saying for other people. But when he found himself just buried in conflict at home, at work, everywhere, he had to face this brutal reality. He was Tom. And that realization, it changed everything. So facing his own messes forced him to look deeper. He realized that just trying harder, trying to be less defensive or trying to be less selfish, it just wasn't cutting it. The problem wasn't really his actions, it was the state of his soul. The only real solution was to go after some deep internal healing. And this brings us right to the book's core diagnosis. Why do our best efforts to change so often fail? Well, it's because we're usually just fighting the symptoms, not the actual disease. A lot of what we might call spiritual growth is actually just sin management. And honestly, it doesn't work. The book uses this fantastic analogy to show the difference. Trying to manage our behavior is like going into your garden and just chopping the tops off the weeds. Yeah, it looks better for a second, but that weed is always going to grow back. Real transformation, what the book calls soul care, is about getting your hands dirty, digging way down below the surface, and ripping that entire root out of the ground. And here's the spiritual heart of the matter. Our obsession with fixing external actions totally misses the point. The author points out that our words and our actions are just the overflow of what's already in our hearts. So it makes sense, right? If you want to change the overflow, you have to change the source. Okay, so what is this disease? What's really at the root of the weed? The book identifies it as living life on a faulty foundation. Let's dig into what that means. Seriously, just picture it. Imagine standing on a stage that wobbles with every single step you take. You feel insecure, right? Unstable? Constantly off balance? Well, that's the book's central metaphor for what it feels like to live a life that's built on an unstable identity. Every move feels risky. So what is this foundation exactly? It's what you fundamentally believe about yourself. It's your core identity. And if that foundation is built on lies, lies like, I have to perform to be loved, or my value is based on what other people think, or I'm just not good enough, then your entire inner world, your soul, is going to have cracks all over it. And those cracks, they show up as tremors in our everyday lives. Things like constant anxiety, being way too sensitive to what people think, that compulsive need to please everyone, or getting defensive at the slightest bit of criticism. The book argues these aren't just character flaws we need to manage. No, they're symptoms pointing directly to the unstable ground we're standing on. Okay, so if the problem is a faulty foundation built on a bunch of lies, the solution has to be rebuilding on a foundation of truth. This is the big turning point in the whole soul care journey, where we finally stop trying to just patch the cracks and we start relaying the entire foundation. The very first block of this new foundation is a radical truth that cuts against pretty much everything our culture screams at us. Your value is not determined by what you achieve. It's not about how well you perform or what other people think. It is completely separate from what you do. So if our value doesn't come from our performance, where in the world does it come from? The book's answer is that our intrinsic worth is unchanging, it's unshakable because it was settled by God. From this perspective, it's a gift, not something you earn, and this truth becomes the absolute bedrock of a healthy soul. But, and this is a critical but, the book clarifies that just knowing the truth isn't enough to set you free. Freedom comes from the active, relentless process of choosing to believe and hold on to that truth, especially when those old lies are screaming at you. It's a process of renewing your mind, one conscious choice at a time. Now, this whole rebuilding process, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You can't do it alone. We need a specific kind of environment for this deep healing to actually take root and last. So what does that atmosphere look like?
It breaks down into 3 essential elements. First, anointed truth, which means truth that isn't just head knowledge, but that carries real spiritual power. Second, confessional community, a safe group of people where you can be totally honest about your junk without being judged. And third, an encounter with God's presence, which is identified as the ultimate source of healing power.
You see how these 3 things work together, right? You can't just read a book and expect to be totally transformed. The model here for lasting change needs powerful truth, processed within an honest community, and then activated by a personal encounter with God. The core message is simple. We cannot heal in isolation. And we'll end with a question that really brings this all home. The book states, we can only give away what we have. So think about it. If your soul is just filled with anxiety and insecurity, well, that's what you're going to pour out on the people around you. But if your soul is being healed, if it's being filled with love and freedom, imagine what you could give then. So the final question is, what are you giving?